Everybody thought he was dying. The strange thing was, he never looked sick. He looked haunted. And there is a difference. The first thing they told me when I started working at the Russo estate was simple. Do not ask questions about Mr. Russo. The second thing they told me was even stranger. Do not mention his health. I remember standing in the enormous marble foyer on my first morning, holding a bucket of cleaning supplies while 3 senior housekeepers stared at me as if they were delivering a warning instead of training instructions. Outside, rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Inside, the mansion felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, careful, like everyone living there had learned to walk around an invisible wound. People worry about him, one housekeeper finally said. But he likes privacy. Another woman shook her head. Just do your work and stay away from the East Wing. I frowned. Why? Nobody answered. They simply exchanged glances before returning to their duties. That should have been enough to convince me to mind my own business. It was not. My name is Emma Hayes, and curiosity has always been one of my worst habits. By lunchtime, I had already learned more rumors about Nicholas Russo than I could count. Some employees believed he suffered from a rare illness. Others thought he had survived some terrible accident years ago. One gardener claimed he rarely left the property. A cook insisted he barely slept. Everyone had a theory. Nobody had facts. What struck me most was how differently they spoke about him. This was not fear. I had seen fear before. This was concern. Genuine concern. The kind people feel for someone they cannot help. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was assigned to clean a corridor on the 2nd floor. The hallway stretched nearly 50 feet beneath crystal chandeliers and framed artwork. Expensive, elegant, empty. As I worked, I noticed something unusual. Every room along the corridor looked occupied except one. A dark wooden door stood closed near the end of the hall. Unlike the others, it showed no signs of use. No footsteps nearby, no activity, nothing. I was studying it when a voice startled me. You are new. I turned immediately. A man stood several feet away. Tall, broad shoulders, black tailored suit, dark hair, gray eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. Nicholas Russo, the owner of the estate. The man everyone believed was sick. For a second, I forgot how to speak. Not because of his reputation. Because he looked nothing like the person people described. He was pale, perhaps, tired around the eyes. But sick? No. There was strength in the way he stood. Control in the way he carried himself. His presence filled the hallway without effort. Yes, I finally said. Today is my first day. His gaze shifted briefly toward the closed door before returning to me. And you are already exploring. The comment caught me off guard. I was cleaning. Something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Almost. Of course. Then he walked away. No guards. No assistants. No dramatic exit. Just silence. I watched him disappear around the corner. And for the first time all day, I felt certain of one thing. Everyone in that house believed Nicholas Russo was suffering from some mysterious illness. But after seeing him with my own eyes, I had a feeling the truth was something far more complicated. The next few days only deepened the mystery. The more I observed Nicholas Russo, the less sense the rumors made. Sick people moved differently. They carried weakness in their posture. Fatigue followed them like a shadow. Nicholas carried something else entirely. Every morning before sunrise, I would see lights on in his study. Every evening long after the staff had finished dinner, those same lights remained on. Whatever burden he carried, it demanded more from him than most healthy people could endure. On my 4th day at the estate, I arrived early to clean one of the library lounges. The mansion was still quiet. Pale morning light filtered through tall windows. As I dusted the shelves, I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Curious, I glanced through the partially open door. Nicholas was crossing the foyer below. He was dressed in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark slacks. Not only did he look healthy, he looked stronger than almost every man I knew. Yet there was something unusual about him. He paused halfway across the room and looked toward a staircase leading to the 2nd floor. Just looked. For several seconds, he stood completely still. Then a strange sadness crossed his face before he continued walking. The expression vanished so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. Later that afternoon, I mentioned it to Martha, one of the senior housekeepers. Her reaction surprised me. Do not watch him too closely, she said while folding linens. Why not? Martha hesitated. Because eventually you will start feeling sorry for him. I frowned. If he is not sick, why does everyone act like he is? She lowered her voice. That is exactly the question nobody can answer. The conversation stayed with me all day. That evening I found myself assigned to the second-floor corridor again. The same corridor. The same locked door. The same uneasy silence surrounding it. As I polished a nearby table, I noticed something I had missed before. There were scratches near the brass doorknob. Tiny marks. Old marks. As though the door had been opened and closed thousands of times over many years. Someone used that room regularly. Yet nobody ever entered while staff were present. My curiosity grew stronger. Unfortunately, so did my caution. Something about the atmosphere around that door felt personal. Not dangerous. Painful. The following morning brought another surprise. I was cleaning a sitting room overlooking the gardens when Nicholas entered unexpectedly. He stopped when he saw me arranging books on a shelf. You seem to spend a lot of time observing things, he said. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were studying me carefully. It is part of the job, I replied. A faint smile appeared. No, cleaning is part of the job. Observing is something else. I felt my cheeks warm slightly. Maybe I am naturally curious. For a moment, he simply looked at me. Then his gaze drifted toward the rain outside the window. Curiosity can be dangerous. The words sounded less like a warning and more like experience. Before I could respond, he quietly added, sometimes the answers people search for are heavier than the questions. Then he left the room. I stood there holding a book, listening to his footsteps fade away. Most people in that house believed Nicholas Russo was suffering from some mysterious illness. But every conversation, every glance, every strange silence pointed toward a different truth. Whatever was hidden behind that locked door was not destroying his body. It was destroying his peace. Secrets rarely reveal themselves all at once. They appear in pieces, like sunlight slipping through cracks in a closed door. A week passed after my conversation with Nicholas, yet his words stayed with me. Sometimes the answers people search for are heavier than the questions. The more I thought about them, the more convinced I became that the locked room on the second floor held the center of whatever burden he carried. Not because it was forbidden, because every person in the estate seemed to orbit around it without ever speaking its name. One rainy afternoon, most of the staff were busy preparing for a private dinner being hosted at the mansion. Deliveries arrived through the service entrance. The kitchen buzzed with activity. For the first time since I started working there, the second floor stood almost completely empty. I had been assigned to dust several guest rooms nearby. As I moved down the corridor, I noticed something unusual. The locked door was slightly open. Not wide, barely an inch. I stopped immediately. My heart began beating faster. For several seconds, I simply stared. Then common sense told me to walk away. Unfortunately, curiosity had never respected common sense. I approached carefully. The corridor remained silent. No voices. No footsteps. Nothing. Through the narrow opening, I could see only darkness and a faint glow from a lamp somewhere deeper inside. I should have left. Instead, I gently pushed the door another few inches. The room beyond looked frozen in time. Dust-free. Perfectly maintained. Sunlight filtered through partially closed curtains. Books lined one wall. A piano stood near a window. Everything appeared untouched, yet cared for. As though someone visited regularly but never stayed long. I stepped inside. The air felt different. Warmer somehow. More personal. Then I noticed the photographs. Dozens of them. Framed pictures covered a large shelf near the fireplace. My breath caught. Every photograph showed Nicholas. But not the Nicholas the first knew. This version smiled. He laughed. He stood on boats, attended parties, traveled to beautiful places. In one photograph, he looked no older than 25. His arm rested around the shoulders of another young man. They appeared inseparable. Brothers perhaps. Best friends. Family. I moved closer. Every picture included the same person. A bright smile. Light-colored hair. Easy confidence. Whoever he was, he had once been one of the most important people in Nicholas's life. Then I noticed the dates. The photographs stopped abruptly. Nothing newer than 10 years ago. Not one. An uneasy feeling settled over me. Why preserve an entire room devoted to the past? Why keep it hidden? Why visit it in secret? A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around instantly. Nobody stood there. Yet panic rushed through me anyway. I quickly returned the photograph to its place and stepped back toward the door. As I left the room, something caught my eye one final time. A silver picture frame sitting alone on a small desk. Unlike the others, it faced away from the entrance. almost as if someone did not want visitors seeing it immediately. Before I could get a closer look, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Real footsteps this time. I slipped out and quietly pulled the door closed just as a security guard rounded the corner. He nodded politely and continued walking. I forced myself to remain calm until I reached the staircase. Only then did I exhale. I had entered the room everyone avoided. I had discovered a version of Nicholas Russo that no longer seemed to exist. And for the first time, I realized the secret hidden inside that mansion was not about illness at all. It was about loss. For the next 2 days, I could not stop thinking about the photographs. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smiling version of Nicholas Russo standing beside the same young man. The difference between those pictures and the man who now wandered the estate like a ghost felt impossible to ignore. Something had happened 10 years ago, something powerful enough to divide a life into before and after. I tried convincing myself to let it go. It did not work. The mystery followed me through every hallway and every chore. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, chance finally gave me another piece of the puzzle. Rain drifted softly against the mansion windows while most of the staff prepared guest rooms for an upcoming weekend gathering. I had been assigned to clean a storage room near the library. The task should have taken 20 minutes. Instead, it changed everything. Hidden behind several old boxes sat a leather portfolio covered in dust. I reached for it only because I needed to clean the shelf beneath it. The moment I moved it, several papers slipped onto the floor. Great, I muttered, kneeling to collect them. Then I froze. The first item was a newspaper clipping. The second was a photograph. My heart immediately began racing. The photograph showed the same young man from the secret room. He appeared a few years older than in the other pictures. He stood beside Nicholas near a lakeside dock. Both men were laughing. The happiness looked effortless. Real. I turned the photograph over. Written in faded ink were 4 words. Brothers by choice forever. My breath caught. Not family. Friends. The kind of friends who become family. Carefully, I unfolded the newspaper clipping. The article was nearly 10 years old. Most of the text had faded, but one sentence remained readable. Local entrepreneur Daniel Carter remembered during annual memorial event. Memorial. I stared at the word. Daniel Carter. For the first time, the young man had a name. Daniel. The realization sent a chill through me. Every photograph stopped 10 years ago. Every trace of happiness ended 10 years ago. And now I held an article describing a memorial held during the exact same period. The pieces were beginning to connect. Too perfectly. A floorboard creaked outside the storage room. I quickly gathered the papers and returned everything exactly where I had found it. Seconds later, Martha appeared in the doorway. One look at my face told her something was wrong. "Emma?" she asked quietly. "What happened?" I hesitated. Then I made a mistake. Who was Daniel Carter? The color immediately drained from her face. For several long seconds, she simply stared at me. "Where did you hear that name?" Her voice sounded almost frightened. "I found an old newspaper clipping." Martha closed her eyes briefly. The reaction told me more than any answer could have. When she finally spoke, her voice softened. "You need to stop digging." "Why?" She looked toward the hallway before lowering her voice even further. "Because some grief never leaves. And some people build their entire lives around carrying it." Before I could ask another question, she walked away. I stood alone in the storage room listening to the rain outside. Daniel Carter was not just part of Nicholas Russo's past. He was the center of it. And whatever had happened 10 years ago was still shaping every moment of Nicholas's life today. After that day, the mansion felt different. The mystery no longer belonged to rumors and whispered conversations. It had a name now. Daniel Carter. Somehow, knowing his name made the silence inside the estate feel even heavier. Everywhere I looked, I noticed traces of absence. A chair left untouched near a garden fountain. An old fishing rod hanging in a storage room. A framed landscape photograph tucked away in a hallway few people used. Small details. Ordinary details. Yet together they created the outline of someone who had once been deeply loved and never forgotten. The strangest part was Nicholas himself. Once I knew what to look for, I began seeing patterns everywhere. Every Sunday morning, he disappeared for several hours. Every evening around sunset, he spent time alone on the western terrace overlooking the lake beyond the property. Every year, according to the staff, he canceled all meetings on the same date in early October. Nobody questioned it. Nobody mentioned it. They simply adjusted schedules and moved on. One evening, while helping Martha organize supplies in the laundry room, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. Was Daniel his best friend? Martha stopped folding a towel. For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she sighed. More than that. Family. Closer. Her answer surprised me. Martha looked toward the doorway before continuing. Some people come into your life and become part of who you are. Losing them changes everything afterward. Before I could ask another question, she shook her head. That is all I am going to say. Later that night, rain covered the estate in a soft gray mist. Most of the staff had already gone home. I was finishing my final tasks when I noticed a light glowing beneath the door of the library. Curious, I approached quietly. Through the partially open doorway, I saw Nicholas sitting alone beside the fireplace. He held a photograph in his hands. The same photograph I had seen in the storage room. The lakeside picture. Him and Daniel. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. The expression on his face stopped me cold. It was not grief alone. It was guilt. Deep, exhausting guilt. The kind that survives for years. The kind people carry because they believe they deserve the pain. I should have walked away. Instead, I accidentally brushed against a small side table near the entrance. The sound was barely noticeable, but Nicholas looked up immediately. Our eyes met across the room. For one terrible second, neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward. I am sorry, I said quietly. I did not mean to interrupt. His gaze shifted toward the photograph before he carefully placed it face down beside him. Most people know better than to wander around the mansion after hours. The comment sounded calm, yet not unkind. Most people are smarter than I am. To my surprise, a faint smile appeared. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. Silence settled between us. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Firelight flickered across the room. Finally, Nicholas spoke. You have been asking questions. It was not an accusation. It was a fact. I swallowed. Maybe. He nodded slowly. And have you found any answers? I looked toward the hidden photograph. Then back at him. Only enough to know that everyone is wrong. Something changed in his expression. Something almost vulnerable. Wrong about what? The answer came before I could stop myself. You are not sick. The room fell silent. And for the first time since I arrived at the Russo estate, Nicholas Russo looked genuinely shaken. For several seconds, Nicholas did not answer. The fire crackled softly in the library while rain continued tapping against the windows. His eyes remained fixed on mine, searching for something. Judgment perhaps. Pity. Fear. Whatever he expected to find, he did not seem to find it. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and released a slow breath. No, he said quietly. I am not sick. Hearing the words aloud felt strangely important, as though a lie that had lived inside the mansion for years had finally been forced into the light. I took a careful step closer. Then why does everyone think you are? A faint smile appeared. Not a happy smile. A tired one. Because it is easier. The answer only deepened the mystery. Nicholas looked toward the fireplace. For a long moment, he seemed lost somewhere far away. Then he spoke again. People understand illness. They understand hospitals, medicine, recovery. His fingers rested on the edge of the photograph beside him. What they do not understand is someone choosing to remain trapped. Silence settled between us. I knew instinctively that every word cost him something. Daniel? I asked softly. His expression changed immediately. Pain flickered across his face before he could hide it. You found his name. It was not a question. I nodded. Nicholas stared into the flames. Daniel Carter was my best friend. The room grew very still. He was the kind of person who made every room brighter just by entering it. He could make strangers laugh. He could make impossible days feel manageable. A small smile touched his lips. He spent half his life getting me into trouble and the other half getting me out of it. For the first time since I met him, I heard warmth in his voice. Real warmth. Not the controlled politeness he showed everyone else. This was different. Human. Honest. Then the warmth faded. 10 years ago, he died. The words landed heavily between us. Nicholas lowered his eyes. And I never figured out how to keep moving afterward. My heart ached for him. Not because of the loss itself. Because I suddenly understood what Martha meant. Some grief never leaves. Nicholas continued speaking quietly, almost as though he were talking to himself. Everyone assumed time would fix it. He laughed softly. Time does many things, but it does not keep promises people make to themselves. I frowned. What promise? The moment the question left my mouth, he became silent. Too silent. His shoulders stiffened slightly. Whatever promise existed, it sat at the center of everything. The hidden room, the photographs, the isolation, the years of suffering. Nicholas stood and walked toward the window overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. That is enough for tonight. His voice was gentle but final. I knew the conversation was ending. Yet before I could leave, he surprised me. Emma. I turned back. He remained facing the window. Most people stop asking questions once they hear part of the story. I waited. You will not. It was not criticism. Somehow it sounded almost grateful. A faint smile appeared on my face. Probably not. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile touched his. Small, brief, real. Then it disappeared. As I left the library, one thought followed me all the way upstairs. I finally knew Nicholas Russo was not haunted by illness. He was haunted by a promise. And whatever that promise was, it had stolen 10 years of his life. The following week arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the estate. Ever since our conversation in the library, something had changed between Nicholas and me. Not dramatically, not visibly. Yet the distance that once existed no longer felt quite as permanent. We spoke more often, sometimes only a few words. Sometimes longer conversations while passing through hallways or crossing the gardens. Each interaction revealed another small piece of the man hidden beneath years of grief. Yet one question remained unanswered. The promise. Whatever promise Nicholas had made 10 years ago still controlled his life. And deep down, I knew he was reaching a point where he could no longer carry it alone. The answer came unexpectedly on a cold October morning. The date itself seemed to affect the entire mansion. Staff members spoke more quietly. Meetings disappeared from Nicholas's calendar. Even the atmosphere felt different. By noon, rain clouds had gathered over the lake beyond the estate. I was carrying fresh linens through the west wing when I noticed Nicholas leaving the house alone. Something about his expression stopped me. He looked calm. Too calm. The way people sometimes look when they are preparing to revisit an old wound. Without fully understanding why, I followed at a respectful distance. Nicholas walked down a narrow path leading toward the far edge of the property. Trees lined both sides of the trail. Fallen leaves covered the ground. Eventually the path opened onto a small lakeside clearing. I froze. A simple stone memorial stood near the water. No grand monument. No elaborate display. Just a quiet place overlooking the lake. Nicholas stopped in front of it. For several minutes, he said nothing. The wind moved gently across the water. Gray clouds reflected on the lake's surface. Finally, he spoke. I know you are there, Emma. I stepped forward slowly. There was no point pretending anymore. Nicholas glanced toward me before returning his attention to the memorial. Carved into the stone were 2 words. Daniel Carter. My chest tightened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Nicholas surprised me. 10 years ago, Daniel saved my life. His voice remained steady, but I could hear the weight beneath every word. Afterward, I promised him something. The air seemed to grow still around us. I promised I would spend every day becoming someone worthy of the sacrifice he made. He lowered his eyes. At first, it sounded noble. A sad smile appeared. Then it became a prison. My heart broke for him. Nicholas, he shook his head gently. I stopped living. I stopped laughing. I stopped allowing myself happiness because every good moment felt like a betrayal. His gaze remained fixed on the stone. If I enjoyed life, I felt guilty. If I moved forward, I felt guilty. So I convinced myself that carrying pain was the same thing as honoring him. The truth hit me with stunning clarity. This was the illness everyone thought they saw. Not physical sickness. Survivor's guilt. 10 years of it. 10 years spent punishing himself for being the one who remained. Rain began falling softly around us. Nicholas stared at the memorial one final time. The worst part, he whispered, is that Daniel would have hated what I became. Tears filled my eyes. Because for the first time since I arrived at the estate, the entire truth finally stood before me. Nicholas Russo was not trapped by the past. He was trapped by a promise he had misunderstood for 10 long years. The rain continued falling long after we returned from the lake. Yet something had changed. Not only in Nicholas, in me as well. For weeks, I had searched for answers. Now that I finally understood the truth, I realized knowledge alone could not help him. Understanding pain and healing from it were 2 very different things. The days that followed became quieter. Not because Nicholas withdrew again. Quite the opposite. For the first time since I arrived at the estate, he seemed willing to let someone share the weight he had carried alone. Small changes appeared first. He joined staff members for breakfast meetings instead of sending instructions through assistants. He spent less time isolated in his study. Occasionally, I even caught him smiling. Real smiles. The kind that reached his eyes. The employees noticed too. Nobody said much, but hope moved through the mansion like sunlight after a long winter. One afternoon, I found Nicholas standing outside the locked room on the second floor. The hallway was silent. Sunlight streamed through nearby windows. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at the door. I have not opened this room for anyone in 10 years. His voice carried both sadness and disbelief. Not because I wanted to protect the memories. He exhaled slowly. Because I was afraid they would change. I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes people cling to pain because it feels safer than uncertainty. If grief remains unchanged, then the connection remains unchanged too. Nicholas rested one hand against the doorknob. Daniel always used to tell me that life keeps moving whether we are ready or not. A faint smile appeared. I hated that advice. I laughed softly. I think most people do. For the first time, a genuine laugh escaped him. Brief, warm, human. Then he opened the door. We stepped inside together. The room looked exactly as I remembered. Photographs, books, the piano. 10 years preserved in perfect stillness. Nicholas walked slowly through the space. His eyes moved from one memory to another. Yet something felt different now. The room no longer looked like a shrine. It looked like a chapter. Important, beautiful, but still a chapter. He stopped beside the piano and picked up the silver frame I had noticed weeks earlier. This time he turned it toward me. The photograph showed him and Daniel sitting on the dock beside the lake. Both were laughing so hard they could barely look at the camera. Happiness captured forever in a single moment. This was taken 2 weeks before he died, Nicholas said quietly. I waited. For years, I could only look at this picture and remember what I lost. His gaze softened. Today I remembered what I had. The words filled the room with a kind of peace I had never felt there before. Nicholas carefully returned the frame to the desk. Then he did something I never expected. He opened the curtains completely. Sunlight flooded the room. Warm light touched the photographs, the books, the piano, every forgotten corner. Dust danced through the air like tiny stars. The room no longer belonged to grief. It belonged to memory. As we stood together in the sunlight, Nicholas looked out the window toward the gardens below. For 10 years, he said quietly, I thought honoring Daniel meant refusing to be happy. His eyes met mine. You helped me realize that honoring him might actually mean living. And in that moment, I knew the locked room had finally opened. Not because the door moved, because the man behind it finally had. 1 year later, the mansion no longer felt like a place built around silence. It felt alive. Morning sunlight filled hallways that once seemed frozen in time. Laughter occasionally drifted from the kitchen. Fresh flowers appeared throughout the estate. Even the staff carried themselves differently. Hope has a way of changing the atmosphere of a place without anyone noticing exactly when it happens. Looking back, the transformation seemed impossible. Yet there it was. Real. Lasting. And standing at the center of it all was Nicholas Russo. The man everyone once believed was fading away now spent more time outside than inside. He attended charity events, met with employees face to face, walked through the gardens without carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The sadness never disappeared completely. Some losses become part of who we are, but it no longer controlled him. One warm spring evening, the estate hosted a fundraising gala in support of local youth programs. Guests filled the ballroom. Music drifted through the air. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished floors. As I stood near one of the windows overlooking the gardens, I watched people laugh and celebrate. It was difficult to believe this was the same place where every conversation once seemed wrapped in caution and sorrow. You are smiling. Nicholas's voice came from beside me. I turned toward him. He looked different than the man I met on my first day. Not younger, not stronger, simply lighter. The years of guilt no longer lived behind his eyes. I was thinking, I admitted. That sounds dangerous. I laughed softly. I was thinking about how much has changed. Nicholas followed my gaze across the ballroom. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded. You changed it. I shook my head immediately. No, a small smile appeared. You opened a door I stopped trying to open. Emotion tightened my throat. Because deep down, we both knew he was talking about far more than a room. Music continued playing nearby. Guests moved gracefully across the dance floor. Through the windows, the lake shimmered beneath the evening sky. The same lake where so much pain had once lived. The same lake that now reflected peace. Nicholas reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. I found this while cleaning out some old files. Curious, I opened it. The note was written in faded handwriting. Daniel's handwriting. My eyes moved slowly across the page. The message was simple. Life is too short to spend it looking backward. If you ever get stuck, find something worth moving toward. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Nicholas smiled. A real smile. The kind that carried gratitude instead of sadness. I think he was right. I looked up at him. I think he would be proud of you. His eyes softened. Maybe. Then he glanced around the ballroom before returning his gaze to me. I know one person who helped make that possible. Warmth filled my chest. Not because of the words themselves. Because I knew how difficult they would have been for him once. The evening continued around us. Music, conversation, light, life. And for the first time in many years, Nicholas stood in the middle of it instead of hiding from it. Sometimes people believe healing means forgetting. It does not. Healing means carrying the memory forward without letting it stop the journey. As I looked across the ballroom and saw Nicholas smiling beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, I finally understood something Daniel had probably known all along. The people we lose never truly leave us behind. They remain in every lesson, every act of kindness, every reason we choose to keep going. And sometimes the greatest way to honor the past is not by living inside it. It is by opening the door, stepping into the light, and allowing yourself to come home again.